You are pressed flat against a brick wall in a dark alley. And somewhere just around the corner, you can hear police whistles getting closer. Behind you, in the truck you were supposed to be guarding, sit 40 crates of liquor that don't legally exist. Because right now, in this country, alcohol itself is illegal, and the entire economy you work inside of exists specifically to sell people something the government has decided they can't have. If those crates get found, you're not just losing product. You're potentially losing your freedom, or worse, depending on who else finds out first, the police or your own organization, if they decide you were careless enough to get caught. America, the 1920s. Prohibition has turned alcohol into the most profitable illegal product in the country, and organized crime families have built entire empires supplying it. You've heard the word people will use to describe men like you for a century afterward. Mobster, wise guy, made man. It sounds like power, respect, easy money. Nobody mentioned that most of your actual life would be built on paranoia, mundane logistics, constant financial risk, and the genuine possibility that the people you trusted most were the ones most likely to get you killed. This is your life as a 1920s mafia member, one of history's most mythologized identities, and one whose real daily existence looked far more anxious and far less glamorous than the movies ever showed you. You didn't wake up one day and simply decide to join organized crime. For most men who ended up in this life during the 1920s, the path ran through immigrant neighborhoods in cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit, where established Italian, Irish, and Jewish criminal organizations recruited from communities already dealing with poverty, discrimination, and limited legitimate economic opportunity. Historical accounts of this era describe a typical entry point starting small, running errands, acting as a lookout during illegal operations, delivering messages, or doing minor enforcement work for an established crew. You weren't handed a leadership role or immediate respect. You earned trust slowly, through a series of increasingly risky tasks specifically designed to test your reliability, your willingness to follow orders without asking questions, and, critically, your ability to keep your mouth shut regardless of what happened. For organizations following the more formalized Sicilian influence structure that several major crime families adopted, becoming a fully initiated made man involved a genuinely elaborate induction ceremony. Historical accounts describe rituals involving an oath of loyalty, and in some documented cases, a symbolic burning of a saint's image while reciting a vow that betraying the organization would result in the member burning like the image in their hand. Whether or not every organization performed this specific ritual, the underlying principle was consistent across the era. This was framed as a lifetime commitment with no acceptable exit, sealed through ceremony specifically to make the psychological weight of loyalty feel absolute. Here's a detail that surprises people who assume every mob member carried a Tommy gun and lived like a movie gangster. The overwhelming majority of your actual daily work had nothing to do with violence at all. Most organizations during this era ran genuinely complex logistical operations. Bootlegging required sourcing raw alcohol or finished liquor, often smuggled from Canada or the Caribbean, transporting it via trucks or boats while evading law enforcement, distributing it to speakeasies and private buyers, and managing the money that flowed through the entire operation. You were far more likely to spend your time as a driver, a bookkeeper, a low-level enforcer collecting payments, or a simple lookout than as anything resembling the dramatic gunman popular culture assigns to this era. Financial reality for most rank-and-file members was considerably more modest than legend suggests as well. While organization leaders and top lieutenants could accumulate genuinely significant wealth, historical accounts and later court testimony from lower-ranking members describe a steady but unglamorous income, enough to live reasonably comfortably by the standards of a working-class immigrant neighborhood, but nowhere near the extravagant lifestyle popular films depict for the entire organization's membership. Show less. Here's the detail that reshapes almost everyone's picture of mob life once they dig into the actual history. Prohibition-era organized crime functioned, in a very real sense, like an elaborate, constantly stressed logistics business. One where every single delivery carried genuine legal and physical risk. The Volstead Act, which enforced prohibition starting in 1920, made manufacturing, transporting, and selling alcohol illegal nationwide, but it did nothing to reduce actual demand. Historical estimates suggest that illegal alcohol production and distribution during this era generated genuinely enormous sums of money, and your organization's entire business model depended on reliably moving product from production points to customers without law enforcement intercepting it. This meant your daily work frequently involved route planning, bribing local police officers and officials to look the other way, coordinating shipment timing, and constantly adjusting operations as law enforcement pressure shifted from one area to another. Bribery, in fact, represented one of the most consistent and, in a strange way, mundane parts of this entire economy. Historical records and later congressional investigations document widespread corruption among local police, judges, and politicians during Prohibition, many of whom received regular payments specifically to ignore bootlegging operations in their jurisdiction. For you personally, this meant a significant part of your job might involve handling these payments, maintaining relationships with corrupt officials, and constantly assessing which authorities could genuinely be trusted to stay bought, and which ones might flip if a bigger bribe came along, or if federal pressure became too intense for a local official to ignore. Territory and product disputes between rival organizations created constant, genuine danger that had far more to do with business competition than personal courage or combat skill. Historical accounts of this era, including the well-documented violence in Chicago under rival bootlegging operations, describe assassinations, ambushes, and open gunfights that frequently resulted from disputes over territory, unpaid debts, or perceived betrayals, meaning your actual physical danger came less from dramatic showdowns and more from the possibility of being in the wrong car, at the wrong intersection, when a rival organization decided to make a point. And here's a detail that genuinely reframes the loyalty and honor image popular culture often assigns to organized crime during this era. Informants represented one of law enforcement's most effective and consistently used tools against these organizations, and the paranoia surrounding potential informants created a constant undercurrent of psychological tension within your own crew. You could never be entirely certain that the person standing next to you wasn't secretly cooperating with federal investigators or a rival organization. And historical accounts describe organizations responding to suspected informants with brutal, sometimes preemptive violence specifically intended to deter anyone else from considering the same move. Meaning some of your greatest genuine danger came from within your own supposedly loyal organization, not from outside law enforcement or rivals. If you assumed the greatest danger in this life came from dramatic, cinematic gunfights, the actual historical record tells a considerably less glamorous story. Physical violence, when it occurred, was frequently sudden, unglamorous, and one-sided rather than the extended dramatic shootouts popular films depict. Historical accounts of documented mob killings during this era describe ambush-style assassinations, drive-by shootings, and executions carried out with little warning, specifically designed to minimize risk to the attacker rather than provide any kind of fair confrontation. If you were targeted, you very likely wouldn't see it coming, and your actual combat skill or bravery would matter considerably less than simple luck regarding where you happen to be standing at a given moment. Beyond direct violence, the constant threat of arrest and prosecution created genuine, sustained legal danger throughout this era. Federal and local law enforcement agencies increasingly targeted organized crime as Prohibition progressed, and historical court records document numerous rank-and-file members receiving significant prison sentences for offenses ranging from bootlegging itself to tax evasion. The latter charge, notably, becoming one of the most effective legal tools federal prosecutors used against organized crime figures specifically because financial records could be pursued even when direct evidence of violent crimes proved difficult to obtain in court. Health risks specific to this particular criminal economy deserve genuine attention as well. Because Prohibition-era alcohol was produced illegally and without any regulatory oversight, historical records document serious, sometimes fatal health consequences from poorly made or deliberately adulterated liquor, including documented cases involving industrial alcohol that the federal government intentionally poisoned in an attempt to discourage illegal consumption. A policy that historians estimate contributed to thousands of deaths nationwide throughout the Prohibition era, some of which occurred among the very bootlegging networks producing and distributing the product. Family life during this era carried its own genuine strain that popular culture rarely emphasizes. Historical accounts and later interviews with family members of Prohibition-era organized crime figures describe a constant undercurrent of anxiety within these households. Spouses and children frequently kept deliberately uninformed about the specifics of daily operations, both for their own legal protection and to maintain operational secrecy, while simultaneously living with the genuine, unspoken possibility that a husband or father might simply not come home one night, with no formal explanation ever provided. And here's a detail that complicates the loyalty and brotherhood mythology significantly. Internal power struggles, betrayals, and violent successions were a genuine, recurring feature of organized crime during this era, not a dramatic exception. Historical accounts describe numerous instances of organization leadership changing hands through assassination rather than any orderly process, meaning your own long-term safety depended not just on avoiding law enforcement and rival organizations, but on correctly judging the shifting internal politics and ambitions of the very people you'd sworn absolute loyalty to. A significant amount of what popular culture associates with 1920s organized crime turns out to be considerably more complicated and considerably less glamorous than the movies suggest. The image of the wealthy, untouchable gangster living in constant luxury applied to a genuinely small percentage of the overall organization. Historical accounts of Prohibition-era criminal hierarchies describe a pyramid structure where top leadership and their closest lieutenants captured a disproportionate share of the profits, while the much larger base of drivers, lookouts, low-level enforcers, and street-level distributors lived considerably more modest, financially precarious lives, genuinely better off than many of their legitimate working-class neighbors in some cases, but nowhere near the extravagant wealth popular. Imagination assigns to organized crime broadly during this era. The end of Prohibition itself, arriving with the ratification of the 21st Amendment in 1933, eliminated the single most profitable product line most of these organizations depended on almost overnight. Historical accounts describe organized crime groups scrambling to shift into other illegal enterprises: gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, and eventually narcotics. Meaning the specific economic foundation that built this era's organized crime empires essentially collapsed within a matter of years, forcing a difficult, uncertain transition for an enormous number of people whose entire livelihood had been built around a single, now legal product. For a significant number of rank-and-file members, the actual ending of their involvement in this world looked far less dramatic than a cinematic shootout. Historical and legal records document many lower-level members eventually facing prison sentences, particularly as federal prosecutors increasingly relied on financial and tax-related charges throughout the 1930s, while others simply aged out of active involvement, quietly transitioning into legitimate businesses, sometimes using capital originally built through illegal operations, or fading into the same working-class immigrant communities they'd originally come from. Their specific involvement in this era's organized crime largely unrecorded by history. Popular culture's romanticized family and honor framing, heavily popularized decades later through films and television, does reflect certain genuine cultural elements present in some organizations, particularly around loyalty rhetoric and formal induction rituals. But historians studying the actual documented history of this era consistently note that the day-to-day reality involved considerably more mundane financial anxiety, genuine physical danger from multiple directions simultaneously, and significantly less of the stylish, controlled glamour that later dramatizations would attach to this specific chapter of American history. The 1920s mobster of popular imagination, sharp suits, effortless power, absolute loyalty, cinematic gunfights, was never entirely fictional. Elements of it genuinely existed, particularly for a small number of organization leaders at the very top. But it was only ever part of the picture. The rest of the picture was a slow, tested entry process built on proving your silence rather than your toughness. Years spent on unglamorous logistics, driving, bookkeeping, bribing officials, rather than dramatic confrontation. A financial reality that left most rank-and-file members comfortable but nowhere near wealthy. A constant undercurrent of paranoia where your greatest danger might come from inside your own organization rather than from police or rivals. And for most people who lived this life, an ending defined by prison sentences, quiet retirement, or simply fading back into the same working-class world they'd started in. Not the dramatic final shootout the movies promised. This was your life as a 1920s mafia member, a role built as much around logistics, bribery, financial anxiety, and constant internal suspicion as around the guns and glamour later movies made famous, and considerably more precarious than a century of romanticized retelling ever gave it credit for. If any part of this surprised you, let me know in the comments which detail changed how you picture the Prohibition era. And if you want to see what life actually looked like for the federal agents whose entire job was hunting men like this down, that video is coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.